Kevin thinks he's playing a game, but he forgot who owns the board. Toby was my favorite junior 5 years ago, the only man I ever wanted to protect. This snake thinks he can poison Toby's heart while I'm watching? I'm not just going to tell Toby the truth. I'm going to make him watch the venom drip until Kevin is nothing but a memory. I have closed a $47 million deal on a Tuesday morning while simultaneously fielding a hostile takeover attempt on my third company and eating a croissant. And I did all three things without spilling a single crumb. I say this not to brag. I say this to establish with clinical precision that Elliot James Sterling does not panic. I panicked on a Thursday. It started, as most disasters in my life have started, with a quarterly review. My finance department had flagged a mid-level accountant named Kevin Marsh for a routine performance assessment. Standard procedure. I barely glanced at the file. I was 3/4 through the page when my assistant, Priya, slid the employee social profile across my desk, the kind we pull for background integrity checks. There was a photo clipped to it, a photo of a couple. Kevin Marsh, grinning with the specific smugness of a man who has gotten away with something, his arm draped around someone whose face was half turned toward the camera. That someone had the most unremarkable, world-ending dimple on his left cheek. My croissant hit the floor. Toby? Tobias Mwangi, 26 years old, veterinary technician volunteering part-time at the Sunridge Animal Shelter, bachelor's in biology from Crestfield University, my Crestfield University, my junior, I stood up from my desk so fast that my chair rolled backward and struck the credenza with a sound like a small explosion. Priya appeared in the doorway holding a tablet, trained by years of service not to react to anything I did. Sir? How long has Kevin Marsh been dating this person? I pointed at the photo with what I hoped was a very casual index finger. It was not. It was a trembling index finger. Priya checked something on her tablet. About 14 months, according to his declared relationship status on the company wellness portal. 14 months. 14 months, and I had never, because of course I hadn't. After Crestfield, after Toby graduated and disappeared back into his quiet, warm, animal-filled world, and I hurtled forward into murders and acquisitions and $800 haircuts and 7 years of pretending I had simply grown out of the feeling. Of course I hadn't known. Pull Kevin Marsh's full file, I said, and my voice was remarkably calm for a man who was currently undergoing cardiac resequencing. Everything. Cross-reference his expenses, his calendar, his business travel, his lunch receipts. Priya looked at me. His lunch receipts, sir? Every single one. What I found over the next 72 hours was not surprising exactly. Men like Kevin Marsh are predictable if you know how to read them, and I have made my fortune reading people. What I found was a meticulous, well-maintained web of simultaneous relationships. 3, to be specific, including Toby. Different schedules, different social circles, different phones, yes, he had 2, and a gift-giving pattern so calculated it could have been a fiscal quarter strategy. I sat with the evidence folder in my hands on a Friday evening in my office, 43 floors up, watching the city lights come on below me like a grid I was slowly solving. Toby. Sweet, laughing, relentlessly optimistic Toby, who used to fall asleep in the university library with a highlighter still uncapped in his hand. Toby, who once cried at a documentary about sea turtles and then immediately organized a fundraiser. Toby, who looked at me, a 23-year-old terrified of tenderness me, with nothing but open warmth and had no idea what it did to my composure. He was being lied to by a man on my payroll. I picked up my phone and called Priya. Book me a meeting room for Monday morning and find out where Tobias Mwangi works his regular shifts. I was going to fix this, rationally, efficiently, with the precision that made me a billionaire by 31. This was, in retrospect, the most optimistic and incorrect assessment of my own capabilities I have ever made. I did not wait for Monday. Saturday found me standing outside the Sunridge Animal Shelter at 10 a.m. holding a folder of printed evidence and dressed in what I considered to be approachable clothing, which for me meant a cashmere turtleneck instead of a suit jacket. I had not considered that a cashmere turtleneck, tailored trousers, and handmade Italian loafers might still read as a man who has never stood near a dog voluntarily. The shelter smelled of disinfectant and hope. A small tabby cat immediately attempted to climb my trouser leg. Toby appeared from behind a swinging door, carrying a medium-sized terrier and wearing scrubs printed with cartoon bones, and for approximately 4 seconds, I forgot why I had come, what language was, and what the folder in my hands contained. He saw me and stopped, a slow, surprised blink. Then, "Sterling? Say something intelligent. You closed a $47 million deal on a Tuesday." "Toby," I said, "you look exactly the same." That was not the opener. He smiled, cautious, confused, and put the terrier down. "You look... What are you doing here? How did you even find... I need to tell you something important about Kevin Marsh. I have receipts, calendar cross-references, and 2 different phone numbers. He is not who he says he is, Toby, and I'm telling you this because..." Toby's smile had gone somewhere else entirely. His eyes had gone quiet in the specific way that I had learned in university meant I had just said exactly the wrong thing. "You're telling me this because... what, exactly?" "Because you deserve to know. Because you think you can walk in here with a dossier," he said, the word like I'd brought a weapon, "and just blow up my relationship? My 14-month relationship? You don't even know Kevin." "I employ Kevin." "That is not the same as knowing him." He closed the folder. He pushed it back across the desk toward me. His voice was very controlled and very quiet, which I recognized from university as significantly worse than shouting. "Sterling, I don't know what this is, a power move, some kind of corporate thing, or you're just bored, but please don't come here again." I opened my mouth. "Don't," he said gently, and picked up the terrier again and walked back through the swinging door. I stood in the animal shelter for approximately 30 additional seconds while the tabby cat sat on my folder and looked at me with an expression of profound contempt. I had been rebuffed. Me! I had been rebuffed by a man in cartoon bone scrubs. I was not angry. I want to be very clear about this. I was not angry at Toby. What I was, if I am being forensically honest with myself, which I prefer not to be but needs must, was devastated in the specific, quiet way that only one person in my 43 years of life had ever made me feel. And that person was now actively avoiding my calls. Priya confirmed it. "He's blocked your direct line, sir." "How do you know that?" "Because you asked me to call him from my number to test, which I did. He answered immediately when he thought it was a shelter supply vendor." Right, I had done that. That was not one of my finer moments. Desperate times, I decided, called for proprietary measures. I did what any reasonable billionaire in my position would do. I bought the shelter. Not immediately. I was subtle about it. I had the acquisitions team structure it as an anonymous community investment through a holdings subsidiary, and I had it done in under a week, which is frankly some of my best work. The Sunridge Animal Shelter became, quietly and legally, a Sterling Holdings property. I upgraded their equipment, raised the staff wages by 30%, and arranged for a new management liaison to visit regularly. That liaison was me. I showed up on Wednesday wearing a different cashmere turtleneck, charcoal this time, slightly more civilian, and announced to the front desk that I was the new facilities representative for the anonymous investor group. The woman at the front desk, whose name tag said Delia, looked me up and down. "You're the investor?" "Representative of the investor." "Aha." She seemed deeply unconvinced. "Toby is in the back with the rabbits." Here is where I should confess the pastry incident, because it is going to come out eventually, and I would rather control the narrative. The morning of my second visit, I realized I didn't know what Toby liked. From a food perspective, we had been university acquaintances, not close enough for me to have learned his coffee order, and the folder I had compiled on Kevin Marsh's life contained Kevin's preferences extensively, and Toby's almost not at all, because at the time I had been focused on gathering evidence rather than compiling a list of my own feelings. So I stopped at the cafe across from the shelter. I intended to buy something. I would look at the menu, I thought, and I would intuit it. I am a man who reads people. The menu had 23 pastry options. What if he's a croissant person? He looks like a croissant person, but he also could be a cinnamon roll person. There's warmth there, generosity. Muffin? No, too casual. Pain au chocolat? Too French. But what if he's more of a... I bought the entire display. Not all 23, 17. They had run out of 6 things. I stood at the counter while the barista stared at me, and I said, very calmly, I'm hosting a meeting, because I am a man who always has a reason. I arrived at the shelter with 3 stacked boxes and the particular expression of someone who has made an objectively irrational decision and is fully committed to it. Toby came out of the back to see what the commotion was. Delia had called for him, loudly, and stopped when he saw me surrounded by pastry infrastructure. Sterling. I didn't know your preference, I said. He stared at the boxes. So you bought... Is that an entire cafe display? I bought options. I believe in covering all viable scenarios. Toby looked at me for a very long moment, and then, against his clear intention, the corner of his mouth moved. Not a full smile, a suppressed smile, which was somehow more devastating. I like almond croissants, he said. Of course he did. Of course, it was the most elegant, specific, and unguessable option. I had bought 17 pastries and not a single almond croissant. I'll note that for next time, I said with complete dignity, and distributed the remaining 16 items to the shelter staff who were delighted. The disguise incident I will mention briefly, and then we will agree to never discuss it again. I had, against the counsel of every rational part of my brain, decided to follow Kevin Marsh on one of his business dinner evenings to gather additional documentation. I wore a baseball cap, which I have never worn in my adult life, a pair of glasses with plain lenses, and a jacket that I borrowed from my driver, which was approximately 3 sizes too large and smelled of air freshener. I looked like a haunted mechanic. I was crouched behind a menu in a bistro in the Marmont district when I heard a voice from the table directly behind me say, "Sterling?" I turned around slowly. Toby was sitting at a small table for 2 with a colleague from the shelter, mid-bite of his dinner, staring at me with the expression of a man who has just encountered something that defies easy categorization. "I'm not here," I said. "You're..." He looked at the baseball cap, at the enormous jacket, at the plain lens glasses. "You're absolutely here. What are you..." "I'm doing research. Market research, for restaurants. I own several restaurants." "You're wearing a disguise. This is a hat." "Sterling," Toby said, very quietly, "is that my boss's jacket?" I looked down. The jacket had, I now saw, a small embroidered logo on the breast pocket. My company logo. I left 17 minutes later. Kevin Marsh was, I noted on my way out, at a corner table with someone who was not Toby and not on his declared calendar. I had the photos. They were, however, taken while wearing a disguise that made me look like a man in witness protection, so their evidentiary dignity was somewhat compromised. I sat with Priya the following morning and I said, "The direct approach isn't working." Priya, to her eternal credit, did not say, "I know," even though she absolutely knew. "What approach are you considering?" "Show, don't tell." I leaned back in my chair. Toby is loyal. He doesn't respond to accusations. He needs to see. But he won't see if he's in his shelter talking to rabbits and being lied to every evening. I steepled my fingers. I need to get him into the same spaces Kevin frequents, naturally, deniably. with corporate justification. "You want to gaslight Kevin's schedule," Priya said. "I want to illuminate Kevin's schedule," I corrected, "for a willing observer." I paused. "I'm going to need 6 cover stories." Priya looked at me. 6. I think 6 should do it. She wrote something down. I strongly suspect she wrote, "God help us all." Outing 1. The Civilian Perspective Cafe. "I need your help," I told Toby on his lunch break, appearing at the shelter with an almond croissant. I had gone to 5 bakeries that morning to find a proper one, and what I hoped was a casual expression. "Corporate matter, nothing dramatic. I'm considering acquiring a cafe in the Meridian district, and I need a civilian perspective, someone without a financial agenda." Toby looked at the almond croissant, then at me. "Why me?" "Because your palate is uncorrupted by expense accounts." This was completely invented and completely plausible. I watched him almost smile again. He came. We sat at a table I had specifically selected, partially obscured by a large leafy potted plant, and I was reviewing the cafe's menu card with the intensity of a man who cares deeply about latte foam ratios when Kevin Marsh walked in. I had known Kevin would be here. Kevin had a standing reservation here on Tuesdays. What I had not anticipated was how quickly Toby would see him, or how immediately the color would shift in Toby's face. That particular quality of stillness that happens when something you were not expecting lands somewhere tender. Kevin was holding hands across a small table with a man in a gray blazer. The hand-holding was slow and deliberate and unmistakably romantic. I watched Toby watch them. "Is that Kevin?" I said, because silence felt like a cruelty I wasn't willing to deploy. "He must be comforting a grieving relative. He's incredibly supportive, I've noticed, very emotionally available." Toby said nothing. Then, "He said he had a work dinner." "He might," I nodded. "Very casual-looking work dinner. The hand-holding is a strong team-building strategy." Toby excused himself. He called Kevin from the bathroom. I ate the almond croissant and felt terrible about everything except the croissant, which was excellent. Kevin told him it was a cousin. Toby came back to the table and said, "It was his cousin," in the specific tone of a man who is 90% sure it was not. "Remarkable family resemblance," I said. Outing 2. The Mandatory Wellness Spa. The voucher I sent to Toby's shelter email was printed on very official Sterling Holdings letterhead and described a corporate wellness partnership initiative that required all contracted facility managers to participate in a stress management experience at the Caldwell Luxury Spa. I was the facility manager for exactly 1 shelter, and Toby had not technically agreed to be included in the partnership, but the letterhead was very convincing. "This seems legally dubious," Toby said, standing in the spa lobby in a fluffy robe, still holding the voucher. The legal team reviewed it, which was true. Priya had read it and said, "Elliot, this is insane," which counts. I had booked us the adjacent relaxation suite to the VIP sauna area because Kevin had a standing Thursday spa appointment that he expensed as client entertainment. I waited. I sipped cucumber water. I counted ceiling tiles. At precisely 2:47 p.m., I accidentally opened the connecting door to the VIP sauna while looking for the towel station. Inside, Kevin Marsh was getting a couples massage. The person being massaged alongside him was not Toby. He was a tall man with an expression of supreme contentment. I gasped with the conviction of a man who has been practicing the gasp in his office mirror. "Oh, I had no idea my accountant had a twin who also enjoys aromatherapy. The family resemblance must run very strong." I turned to Toby. "Do you know Kevin's family well? Do twins run in it?" Toby stared through the doorway. His cucumber water was very still in his hand. "Two coincidences," Toby said slowly, walking back to our suite. "Life is full of them," I offered. Toby looked at me. It was a different kind of look than before. Not warmed, not charmed, not suppressing a smile. It was the look of a person who is beginning to do arithmetic. "Sterling," he said, "are you orchestrating something?" "I run 37 companies. I don't have time to orchestrate something." This was, statistically speaking, the largest lie I have ever told. Outing 3, the rooftop lighting check. "I need you to look at the lighting," I told Toby on Friday. "At the elevation lounge. I'm considering some architectural modifications, and I need a non-engineer's perspective." "You need a veterinary technician's perspective on your rooftop architecture? You have an excellent eye." This was also true. He did. We stood on the balcony of the elevation lounge at 8:30 p.m. while the city spread out below us in all its glittering complexity, and I handed Toby a pair of binoculars, top of the line with night vision capability, which I described as a standard site assessment tool. "Check the structural integrity of that private booth," I said, pointing down into the courtyard below. "It was recently renovated." Toby put the binoculars to his eyes. He went very still. In the private booth below, Kevin Marsh was kissing a man with the slow, deliberate confidence of someone who believed himself entirely unobserved. "Oh no," I said. "Is that Kevin again? He is remarkably social. I should consider him for our community outreach team." Toby lowered the binoculars, he put them on the balcony railing, and he looked at the city for a long time without speaking. And I stood beside him and said nothing, because there are moments when even I know that language is the wrong tool. "I'm not losing my mind," Toby said. Not a question. "You are the sanest person I know," I said, and I meant it. Outing 4, the charity gala and the unlimited shrimp. I had been very careful to mention the shrimp. "Unlimited shrimp," I told him. "It's an extraordinary spread. You would be doing me a genuine favor. I need a +1 and my assistant has the evening off." Priya had the evening very much not off. She was managing the seating plan for this specific charity gala from her laptop in a car outside, but Toby didn't need to know that. I seated us at a table directly behind Kevin Marsh, who was attending with a wealthy socialite named Clarice, who had been, according to my research, receiving flowers from Kevin's personal card for approximately 6 weeks. Kevin was leaning toward Clarice with the practiced intimacy of a man performing sincerity for an audience. "He's telling her he's single," Toby said, very quietly. "He's using—" a pause. "He's using the same lines." "The acoustics in here are extraordinary," I said, sighing loudly. "You can hear everything, every single word, every lie. I mean," I picked up my champagne, "every nuance." Toby didn't eat the shrimp. He sat very still through the main course, and the dessert, and the silent auction, and I watched the denial crumbling in real time, not with satisfaction, because there was nothing satisfying about watching someone realize they'd been betrayed, but with the particular grief of a person who has known the truth for weeks and has had to wait. "How many times?" Toby asked on the ride home. "How many times what?" How many people is he?" He stopped. He looked out the car window. "You knew," he said. "When you came to the shelter with that folder, you already knew everything." "Yes," I said. "And I called you a liar." "You called me a harasser, technically." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You were protecting someone you loved. That's not something to apologize for." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "One more of these outings, Sterling, and I'm going to need an explanation." "One more outing," I agreed, "and then I'll explain everything." Outing 5, the company car test drive. I let Toby drive a Bentley Mulliner. I want to record this for history. I have never let another living human being drive one of my vehicles. I let Toby drive a Bentley Mulliner, and his expression when the engine turned over was the single most worth it thing that has ever happened in my professional or personal life. "This is obscene," he said, delighted by himself. "It's efficient," I said. We drove through the Belmont district and I told him to take a left on Harford Street, which I had known, because I knew Kevin's entire calendar by this point, which is either dedicated or alarming, depending on how charitable you're feeling, would take us directly past the Whittemore's Boutique Hotel. I said, "Can you slow down? I need to check the valet service at this property. We might be acquiring it." Toby slowed the Bentley, and Kevin Marsh walked out of the Whittemore's entrance with a weekend bag over one shoulder and a new man's hand in the other. It was the weekend bag, the brown leather duffel with the silver clasp. Toby had mentioned it once, in passing, to a shelter colleague while I conducted a facilities review. He'd saved for 2 months to buy it for Kevin's birthday. Toby saw the bag before he saw Kevin's face. He stopped. "That's the bag I gave him?" I said nothing. Sometimes silence is the most honest sentence. Toby put the car in park in the middle of Hartford Street. A taxi behind us honked. He didn't react. He was watching Kevin and his companion disappear through the hotel's revolving doors, the brown leather bag swinging. "Drive?" I said softly. He drove. Neither of us spoke for 7 blocks. Then he said, very calmly, in the voice of someone who has moved through pain and into something quieter and colder, "The next outing, you said you'd explain everything." "I will," I promised. One more. Outing 6, the jewelry launch, the final straw. I want to be precise about what I intended for the jewelry launch and what actually happened, because these are 2 very different things, and the difference matters. I had intended to take Toby to the launch as a soft finale, one last piece of evidence in a context controlled enough that he would be surrounded by elegance rather than shock, where I could be near him when understanding arrived. I had arranged for us to be in a quiet viewing gallery overlooking the engagement counter, which I had known, because of course I had known, that Kevin would visit tonight. What I had not known was the ring. Kevin Marsh had apparently decided, with the absolute audacity of a man who is juggling 3 relationships and believes the world owes him grace, to propose to his 3rd partner tonight, using a credit card that Toby had helped him clear 3 months ago when Kevin claimed to be in financial difficulty. Toby didn't know that last part yet. He found out when Kevin handed the card to the jeweler, and Toby, standing beside me in the viewing gallery, made a sound like he'd been briefly deprived of oxygen. He stopped. "That's the card I—" Another stop. We watched Kevin lean across the counter, ring in hand, face arranged in an expression of devastated sincerity, saying words we could just barely hear through the gallery glass. "I have never loved anyone like this. You're the only real thing in my life." Toby sat down, not in a chair. There was no chair nearby. He sat down on the gallery floor, back against the wall, and his face did something I cannot adequately describe and will not try to, because some things are private, even in narration. I sat down beside him, on the floor of my own jewelry launch in a bespoke suit, and I did not care even a little. "Toby," I said. He pressed the back of his mouth to his hand. He was not crying, not yet. He was doing the thing that comes before crying, where the body is still deciding whether the hurt is real enough to expend that energy on. "Toby," I said again, and I put my hand over his where it rested on his knee, and I left it there. He leaned sideways, very slightly. His shoulder touched mine. We sat on the floor together while the jewelry launch happened 30 feet away, and I thought, I have been waiting 5 years to be this close to you again, and I am so sorry it cost you this much to get here. I had the villa in the Maldives on standby, because I am, if nothing else, prepared. "I'm taking you somewhere," I told Toby in the car afterward. "Not for work, not for an outing, just somewhere, quiet. You don't have to do anything. You can tell me no." He looked out the window for a long time, then, "Okay." Just okay. 2 letters. I have never been more grateful for 2 letters in my life. The villa sat on a private island, and the water was the specific shade of blue that seems invented. Toby stood on the deck the first morning and looked at the ocean for so long that I worried he had forgotten I existed, and then he turned and said, "You bought the shelter, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. I preferred the term invested in. "Sterling." "Yes, I bought the shelter." He turned back to the water. "Why?" Because I needed an excuse to be near you, because I couldn't walk in through the front doors myself, because I am apparently the world's most over-resourced coward, because I wanted to make sure you were, that the place you cared about was protected, he said. Yes, I said. He was quiet for another moment. Then, without turning around, when did you figure out you still had feelings for me? I paused. I saw your photo on Kevin's HR file. He made that almost laugh sound again. You didn't have feelings for me at university? I had feelings for you at university, I said, that I had no earthly idea how to express, and so I expressed them by doing nothing. And then you graduated, and I told myself it was just... I stopped. I exhaled. It was not just anything. He turned around. I had prepared something to say. I had, in fact, drafted 3 versions of what I wanted to tell him during the flight, which I had revised down to 1 and then rehearsed twice in the villa bathroom that morning. I abandoned all of it. I've loved you since the day you fell asleep in the library with your highlighter uncapped, I said, since you cried at the sea turtle documentary and then organized a fundraiser the next morning, since you were 21 and I was 23. And the most terrifying realization I'd ever had was that I wanted to know everything about you. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone, opening the photo I had saved years ago, a group photo from a Crestfield University event. Slightly blurry, the 2 of us at the edge of the frame. I didn't want to break your heart, Toby. I wanted to save it. He looked at the photo for a long time. You bought the entire pastry display, he said finally. I was panicking. You wore a disguise to follow Kevin. That was strategic reconnaissance. You bought my workplace. That was... Yes, that was excessive. I accept that. He was smiling now. Really smiling, the full version, the one that did what it had always done to my cardiovascular stability. You are the most ridiculous man I have ever met, he said, and you are the CEO of something like 30 companies. 37. 37 companies, and you bought 17 pastries because you didn't know my coffee order? Croissant order. Sterling. He stepped closer. Ask me. I looked at him. The water was impossibly blue behind him, and he was wearing a linen shirt that Priya had helped me pack for him because I hadn't known his size either. She'd called it educated guessing based on the photos, and I had pretended not to hear that. And he was looking at me with the kind of directness that made me feel very much like a 23-year-old who did not know how to do any of this. Be mine, I said, not as a junior, not as a project, not as someone I need to protect, though I reserve the right to remain extremely invested in your well-being. I took a breath. Be mine because I am embarrassingly in love with you and have been for 7 years, and I would like to stop pretending otherwise. He said, give me 3 days. 3 days. 72 hours. I had run hostile takeovers with less anxiety than the following 72 hours of walking on a private island with Toby Mwangi, watching him feed fish off the dock and fall asleep in a hammock and laugh at things I said that weren't even funny, just things I said, regular sentences, and he laughed at them like they were precious, and I thought I might actually combust. On the 3rd evening, the sun was going down and the water had gone from blue to gold to pink, and we were sitting on the deck with our feet hanging over the edge, and Toby said, Sterling. Elliot, I said, for the love of Elliot. I have bought your workplace. I have sat on a jewelry launch floor. Elliot. He grinned. Elliot. A pause. Yes. I think the word hit my chest before my brain understood it. Yes? I said. Yes. He was laughing at my face. Yes, you ridiculous, overprepared, pastry-buying disaster of a man. Yes. I did not embarrass myself further. I kissed Toby on a private island in the Maldives while the sun went down, and if I then needed to sit very still for approximately 3 minutes to collect myself, that is between me, Toby, and the ocean. We returned to the city on a Monday. I want to describe Kevin Marsh's face when we walked through the glass doors of Sterling Holdings headquarters at 9:03 a.m. I want to describe it in forensic detail because I have been imagining this moment for weeks, and the reality exceeded my projections. He was at the coffee station in the lobby, ground floor, open plan, visible from the entrance. He saw me first, which is usually how it goes. Then his eyes moved, the way eyes do when you walk in with someone tracking sideways, and stopped. Toby was wearing a charcoal blazer over his usual clean lines. He was holding a coffee I'd bought him. Almond croissant was already in the bag, and he looked completely, serenely calm in the way that people do when they have made peace with something enormous. Kevin's coffee cup tilted. He caught it. He looked at me, then at Toby, then at our hands because I was holding Toby's hand with the deliberate, unhurried grip of a man who intends for every person in this building to understand exactly what they are seeing. I watched Kevin do the arithmetic. I watched it land. I smiled at him. It was a very specific smile, the kind I use in boardrooms when I've just revealed a counteroffer that changes everything. The kind that says, I've known the whole time and I've been waiting for this moment. Kevin said nothing. We walked past him to the elevator. I called him into my office at 11 a.m. alone. Kevin Marsh sat across my desk and had, to his credit, arranged his face into something resembling composure. He was a good accountant. He had been a good accountant for 3 years, and his actual professional conduct was, despite everything, excellent. I had thought about this carefully. "You're not fired," I said. He blinked. "You're a skilled accountant, and replacing you would cost me time I don't have." I folded my hands on the desk. "However, you have 2 options." I paused. Let the silence do its work. Option 1, transfer to our North Branch. It's in a different city, a good position, a reasonable team. You'd be effective there. Another pause. Option 2, stay here. Same desk, same title, same salary. I leaned forward very slightly. And every single day in this office, I will demonstrate exactly what it looks like to love Tobias Mwangi correctly. I will bring him lunch. I will walk him to his car. I will announce to this entire building that he is mine and I am his, and I am proud of it. I held Kevin's gaze. Every day you stay, you will watch what you threw away. You will watch it in HD. You will watch it without the option of looking away because I own this building. Kevin stared at me. "Take the week," I said pleasantly. "Think it over." He chose the transfer by Thursday. I would like to tell you I was subtle about it. The announcement, the proud boyfriend moment that Priya later described as the most unhinged use of a company-wide email thread in professional history. I was not subtle about it. On Friday morning, Toby came to visit me at the office. He was getting a tour, theoretically, of the building I had now invited him into approximately 17 times, and I took him to the executive floor, and I introduced him to every single person we passed. "This is Tobias. He's mine." Shake of hands. Move on. "Tobias, mine." Nod. Continue. At the finance team meeting I had scheduled, I opened by saying, "Before we begin, some of you have noticed Tobias Mwangi in the building this week. I want to clarify that he will be here frequently, because we are together, and I'm very happy about it, and I wanted you all to know that directly, rather than through the rumor mill." Questions? There were no questions. Sandra from legal started applauding. 2 junior analysts followed. Toby, standing beside me, put his face in his hand. "Elliot," he said, muffled by his own palm. "Yes?" "This is insane!" "This is transparency." I looked at the room. "It's a core company value." "You are using your employees to celebrate," I said. "They're happy for us." Sandra's applauding. "Sandra is always looking for a reason to applaud." "I love Sandra," I said. Toby lowered his hand. He was laughing. Really laughing, the full-bodied version, the kind that crinkled his eyes and made the dimple on his left cheek appear like it was settling in for the long term. He looked at me the way he used to look at me across a university library, back when I was 23 and terrified and had no language for what I felt. And I thought, there you are. There you finally are. You bought my workplace, he said. I'll deed it back to you, I offered, as a gift. You bought the whole display case of pastries. I didn't know your order. You wore a disguise, strategic reconnaissance, to a restaurant where you ran into me. He stepped closer, and you said, I'm not here. I was clearly there. You took me on 6 dates, he said, and called them corporate outings. They were very corporate. Elliot. He was close now, close enough that I could see every detail of his face clearly, every line of warmth and humor and hard-won steadiness. And I thought that if I live another 43 years, I would like to spend a significant portion of them exactly here. You are the most overcomplicated, over-resourced, genuinely unhinged person I have ever known. Yes, I said. And you've been in love with me since the library. Since the library, I confirmed. He kissed me in the executive office, in front of the glass wall overlooking the city, with Sandra from legal still applauding somewhere in the background. And I thought, in the clear, precise language of a man who has built 37 companies on the foundation of knowing what he wants, yes, this, exactly and only this. Kevin Marsh relocated on the 1st of the month. His farewell email to the team was polite and professional. He did not reference the jewelry launch, or the weekender bag, or the 3 simultaneous relationships, or the moment in the Sterling Holdings lobby when he saw exactly what he had discarded. I did not reply to the email. I was busy. I was busy ordering an almond croissant from the bakery 4 blocks away, the good one, the one with the right amount of frangipane, and walking it down to Toby's office. He had one now, a corner one on the floor below mine, which I had set up as a satellite consulting space for corporate wellness initiatives, which remained technically valid as a business category. He was on a call when I came in, gesturing at me to wait, and I sat down in the chair across from his desk and looked at him, really looked at him, the way I'd been too afraid to in university, the way I'd been too careful to across 17 pastry boxes and 6 elaborate outings and 1 sun-drenched private island. And I thought, I didn't win a game. I just finally, at the age of 43, stopped playing one. He hung up and looked at the paper bag. Is that from Renat's? It's the frangipane one. He opened the bag and looked at the croissant and then at me, and his face did the thing, the warmth and the humor and the dimple, and said, You bought one. I learned your order, I said. I thought we'd established that I can, in fact, be taught. Toby Mwangi picked up his almond croissant and smiled at me across his desk, in my building, in my city, in the life I had built out of ambition and strategy and very expensive suits. And I felt, for the first time in perhaps my entire adult existence, like I had finally closed the deal that mattered. You're still ridiculous, he told me. Endearingly so, I said. That's the technical term. He threw a napkin at me. I caught it. I am, after all, Elliot James Sterling. I don't miss. The Sunridge Animal Shelter later received a full renovation, a new adoption wing, and an anonymous endowment sufficient to fund operations for the next 20 years. Sterling Holdings' Q3 report noted an unprecedented decrease in executive HR incidents and an equally unprecedented increase in morale. Sandra from legal cried at the company holiday party. She said it was allergies. It was not allergies. The end.